Conas, taoi. Welcome back to the Candlelit Tales podcast and this year's Samhain specials inspired by folklore collection of Lady Jane Wilde, famous mother of a famous son. In this episode, Cirque is going to tell you the story of the corpse's skin. It's a creepy one. Lock in. Get ready. It's also a love story, but creepy. Listen back to our previous Samhain stories to get in the mood for Halloween and subscribe to our YouTube to see all these tales in a playlist. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsors on the Candlelit crew who've joined patreon.com/candlelittales to support this podcast. Check out our website at candlelittales.ie to see our upcoming shows, and you can also find out more details of our upcoming storytelling courses. Our year-long deep dive into the Celtic calendar, Turning the Wheel Together, is open for applications right now, and our crash course in storytelling, Answer the Noble Call, is available too. You can find out more details in the links in the show notes below for both of these. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Above all, enjoy these stories and hopefully get a chance to tell some too this season. But for now, hey Sorka, will you tell us a creepy story?
There was once a girl who wanted, above all else, to be loved. Her name was Aoife. She wanted everyone to love her, but she had no love to give in return. And so her idea of love was a strange thing, strange and twisted. To her, love meant adoration and obedience and fawning. It meant people looking at her, always admiring her, following her directions, doing as they were told. Now, of course, as is common with such people, she found it hard enough to keep the love of others, with her behaviour driving them away, much as her beauty often drew them in at first. But Aoife's grandmother had taught her a few things. Her grandmother had been much beloved. She was wise in the old ways, and she spent her wisdom freely, giving others gifts, giving them healing, prosperity, blessings. She was often consulted. And when she died, Aoife found that she had lost one of the few people who loved her unstintingly. But that night, after her grandmother's funeral, after she had been given the day off in the big house where she was a servant to attend, Aoife found herself thinking on things her grandmother had said to her, but rarely. An odd time when the old woman had been rambling. And always her talk of these things had been followed by stern warnings, imprecations to never do the things that she had spoken of. And among the things that she had spoken of that she considered most forbidden, and that Aoife saw little problem with, were the various uses of corpse skin in magic. Now, Aoife lay awake, contemplating. The skin of a freshly buried corpse could do many things, and one of the things it could do was show her the face of the man that she would marry. Now, Aoife, living in a fine house, living close to the gentry, envied them, of course, as many servants did. But she felt a boiling resentment inside her, that they should have so much and she should have so little. And she also thought that, living as she did in close proximity, she might be able to catch the eye of some young lord or other, might be able to beguile someone into marrying her, lifting her up from her lowly station, giving her the life which she was sure that she deserved. And so she crept out. She snuck out in the dark of the night, and she went to her grandmother's recently dug grave. Digging up a corpse was more work than she had ever anticipated, harder work than she had ever put herself to in her life, physical labour. But she did not need to dig up all of the old woman. She only needed her arm. And eventually she had it. The woman had been old. her grandmother, the skin loose on her bones. And so Aoife was able to take a knife and cut just a small bit of skin from the old woman's upper arm before she quickly reburied her. The night had gone swiftly. It was lucky for Aoife that they were in the dark half of the year now, and the nights were longer than the days, coming close as it was to Samhain, All Hallows' Eve. She knew too that this was a potent time for divination, the kinds of magics that she wanted to do. And so she brought the corpse skin back home with her, back to her servants' quarters in the attic of the big house, and she lay down with the corpse skin under her pillow. It wasn't that night that she could do the spell, for she spent the night mostly sleepless, between the digging and the burying and the coming back and the cleaning up. She hadn't any time for sleep. But the following night was closer still to Samhain, and that night she did indeed dream. She dreamed of a wealthy man indeed. She dreamed of her own master. Now, that was a strange dream to have, because he was married and his mistress was very much alive and well. Still, the next time Aoife was attending her mistress, the mistress asked her, "Aoife, I heard that you were interested in seeing the face of your future betrothed. Did you do any of those love spells? Did you whisper to a mirror? Did you throw the apple peel over your shoulder? Did you get any result?" And Aoife found her lips turning up in a smile, a cruel, cold smile. And she said to the mistress, "You know, I did, and I saw your husband." And she let that sit in the room for a moment as the blood drained from her mistress's face, before she said, "And so I think, madam, it must all be a sham. There must not be any truth to it at all. For how could I marry your husband and you alive and well?" Well, there was something in it, after all. Before the year was out, the mistress herself had passed away. Some fever took her that no one could really explain and no doctor could cure. The whole house was in mourning, all of them wearing black, the master distraught. But Aoife had another idea. There was another spell, a stronger spell, a more dangerous spell, that her grandmother had told her about, whispered about really. Tauriel agus drimail. And all she'd have to do was dig up another freshly buried corpse. Of course, Aoife knew well that there was a corpse freshly buried in the graveyard, and as all the rest of the household was going about distracted with grief, Aoife was going about distracted with planning. How could she pull this off? She hadn't been able to dig her grandmother's body up whole, but she would need more from this woman. She'd need much more from the mistress. She determined she would have to take someone into her confidence. There was at the same house a stable boy who Aoife knew was besotted with her. Of course, she would never give him the time of day because he was a stable boy and she had higher plans for herself. But she could smile at him, and she often did. She could keep him sweet, and she did. And now she went to him, and she told him she needed his help. With tears in her beautiful eyes, she told him how much she feared now that the mistress was gone. Now that she was the only maidservant in the house, what might become of her? She might be cast out. But if he would only help her, she could weave a spell of protection around herself, a spell of good fortune, and she would certainly share that fortune with him. The stable boy, who was indeed besotted. Well, it gave him pause when she told him the mechanics of what she needed him to do. But he loved her. He believed that her beauty could conceal no evil. No one as fair as she could ever be wicked. And so he went with her, that night, to the graveyard. The digging went easier this time for Aoife, for she did little of it. The stable boy did the most of it. But he was strong-backed and used to that kind of work, and so she didn't think it overly fazed him. She directed him to dig up the mistress, and she helped him unwrap the shroud from around her dead body. And then they laid the mistress out, face down in the dirt. Aoife lifted up the hair that she had often combed and dressed into fine hairstyles and threw it out of the way. And then she took her knife. And this time it was not a little bit of skin from an old woman's arm. This time it was a long strip, all the way from the head, right down the back, the buttocks, the back of the thigh, all the way down to the heel. She took that long strip of skin, scraped it so that the clinging flesh was gone from it, and told the stable boy to bury the body back the way it had been, as she muttered the words of the spell over and over again, Drimol agus Thorol, Drimol agus Thorol, and wrapped the corpse skin around her waist as a belt. The stable boy was unnerved by what he'd seen, and after they got back to the big house he started to avoid her a little. But he also waited to see what would become of her, and he loved her too well to speak of what had happened. Aoife, for her part, she wore the belt, this grisly belt, next to her shift, under her clothes, for a day and a night, imbuing in it all of her own powers of persuasion. Everything in her that was lovable, that was appealing, she poured into it with her mind's eye. The next part of the spell was complicated. She had to take the piece of corpse skin and tie it around the arm of her intended while he slept, and take it away before he woke. That meant waiting until the master was asleep, waiting until the whole household was asleep, and creeping by herself into the master's bedroom. Now, if she were caught, she would be ruined. Of course, if anyone knew what she was doing, she would be ruined. But even if they didn't, there was no innocent explanation for a maidservant in her master's bedroom after dark. So she had to wait until the house was all quiet, and she had to creep through the halls furtive as a mouse. She had to avoid the floorboards that she knew that creaked, and open so carefully the heavy door of her master's bedchamber, and slip inside quiet as a ghost. And there he lay sleeping. She crept close to the bed, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, waiting to see if it was interrupted ever. She had to ease his arm out from under the covers, holding her breath to see if he would wake, expecting every instant his eyes to flick open. But the master slept on, and Aoife took her length of corpse skin and tied it around his arm. And then she waited. It was no good her leaving now and having to creep back in. She had to let him dream of her, and then she had to take the skin back off his arm before he woke. So she stayed, crouched in the shadows of her master's bedchamber, all the night long, until she saw the sky beginning to grey with the first traces of dawn, and then, quickly and furtively, she untied the corpse skin, her mistress's corpse skin, his late wife's corpse's skin, from the master's arm, stuffed it into her pocket, and scurried out, unseen and unheard. The other servants remarked on the sudden change in their master's manner. From that morning on, he behaved as a man besotted. Even though his wife was barely cold in the ground, he started to court this servant, Aoife, as if she were the most wonderful lady he'd ever seen. As if he did not grieve his wife at all. It caused rumour and consternation, and only the stable boy knew. When people muttered about love spells, he was the only one who knew. She had been casting some spell. What it was, he didn't know. But he was heart-sick and heartbroken to see her smiling at the Lord's advances. And it was not long before she was married. Mistress of the same house where she had once worked. Now sleeping in the bedchamber where she had once dressed the hair of the lady of the house. And Aoife loved being the mistress of the house. Everyone now was at her beck and call. Everyone had to turn their heads to look at her when she came into a room. The master of the house was still besotted with her, absolutely enamoured. It had caused a terrible scandal when he married her, but he did not care. He said he would give up the world for her, and Aoife loved to hear that, for to her it seemed that that was right and proper. Now, whatever friends she had had among the servants, some of them still thought that things might be better with her in charge, but they found her a petty and cruel tyrant. She accused another maid of stealing. She snubbed the stable boy entirely, never spoke to him directly at all from that day on. She was a terror to all of them, haranguing them, berating them for any little mistake, for she said she knew all their tricks, all the ways that servants liked to shirk, because she had done them herself when she was a servant. And so, of course, the other servants talked more and more about how little they liked her, their new mistress that was once one of them, elevated above her station, terrible with it. And eventually, one night, the stable boy told the story of what she had done, what she'd had him do, stumbling over his words, for he knew it implicated him as well. It made him guilty too, by association. And it was another of the servants who said, "That sounds like a love spell. Corpse skin. I know you can use it for a love spell." And they put their heads together then, the servants. They knew she must have some token, something that kept his lordship bound to her. And so, Aoife's new maid, who had been brought in to serve her, and who hated her mistress with a passion, she was the one delegated. She was the one delegated to find out where Aoife kept her most precious things. There was a chest with her bridal gown in it, a corsage, a few other things that she'd preserved from her wedding day. And it was this that the maid dropped a candle into. One afternoon, when her ladyship was out, everything in that chest went up in smoke. The other servants rushed in and they put the fire out after giving it time to do its work. And somewhere during that day, Aoife saw the change come over her husband's face. He looked at her as if confused, as if he didn't recognise her. And when she came back to the house, she saw it. That chest with her bridal gown, that chest where the piece of corpse skin had been wrapped around the waist of it like a belt. All was gone, and he was no longer in her power. In a fury, Aoife cursed at the servants, raved and roared at them. But every single one of them stood up and left the room. In her shouting, in her imprecations, she let slip what she had done, that she'd put a love spell on the Lord, the master of the house. He heard it too. No, he did not cast his wife aside, for all that this had been a scandal and a disgrace. Instead, he simply stopped talking to her. And all of the servants followed suit. When she walked into a room, they walked out. At dinner time, they served him, but they never, ever served her. No one, not in the big house, not in the village nearby, not anywhere in the countryside around, for word of what she had done spread like wildfire. No one would speak with her. No one would look at her. No one would give her food or drink or company or chat. No matter how she begged, no matter how she raged, no matter how she pleaded, everyone left her alone. And before the next Samhain rolled around, she was half mad from it. The loneliness, the horror of it. And that Samhain Eve, raving, feverish, delirious, maddened by her own deeds, and entirely alone, she died. And it is to be hoped that no one was foolish enough to interfere with the skin of Aoife's corpse.
Exciting news, we wrote our first book. People always ask us what book to start with and where to even begin with Irish mythology. That's not just Irish. Celtic mythology covers Scottish, Irish and Welsh, and it's beautifully illustrated. It's available online, and it will spark your love affair with these tales.